The spectacle of the auction caught everyone's attention in Laredo, Texas, that sweltering July afternoon in 1875. Delilah Evans stood on the makeshift platform, her cheeks burning with humiliation as the auctioneer circled her like a vulture, pointing out her flaws to the jeering crowd. Her crime: being a woman who couldn't fit the narrow definition of beauty that the frontier demanded. "Look at this one, gentlemen. A healthy woman might be a bit too healthy if you catch my meaning," the auctioneer called out, eliciting cruel laughter from the gathered men. "Starting bid is low for obvious reasons. Who'll give me $5 for this hefty bride?" Delilah kept her eyes fixed on the dusty ground, refusing to let these strangers see her tears. At 22, she'd traveled west from Boston after her parents died, answering an advertisement for a housekeeper at the Ellis Ranch. But when she arrived in Laredo, Mr. Ellis had taken one look at her fuller figure and declared she wouldn't do. Instead of sending her back east, he decided to recoup his investment by putting her up for auction like livestock. $3. "Do I hear 4? The auctioneer's voice cracked through the hot air. A voice from the back of the crowd suddenly called out, $20. The crowd parted, and a tall man in a dusty black hat stepped forward. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his blue eyes were kind as they met Delilah's. He couldn't have been more than 30, with broad shoulders and a quiet confidence that silenced the murmuring crowd. $20. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. "That's mighty generous for this one, mister." The stranger's jaw tightened as he strode forward. "Her name is Delilah Evans," she answered before the auctioneer could speak for her. "Miss Evans deserves better than your mockery," the man said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet street. "You're perfect just as you are, Miss Evans." He extended his hand to help her down from the platform. "Quentin Keller. I own a small ranch north of town." Delilah hesitated, unsure if exchanging one unknown man for another was any improvement to her situation, but something in his steady gaze gave her hope. "Why?" she whispered. "Because no person should be treated like property," he said simply, "and because I could use a housekeeper who can read." He nodded toward the book peeking out of her small carpet bag. It wasn't a declaration of love, but in that moment, as Quentin Keller handed over the $20 that bought her freedom, Delilah felt something she hadn't expected to find in Laredo, Texas dignity. What she didn't know was that this was just the beginning of their story. The ride to Quentin's ranch was mostly silent, with Delilah perched uncomfortably on the wagon seat beside him. The endless Texas landscape stretched around them, vast and intimidating to eyes accustomed to Boston's crowded streets. "It's not much," Quentin finally said as they crested a hill. Below them sat a modest but well-maintained ranch house with a barn and corral nearby. A few cattle grazed in the distance. "Been building it up for 5 years now. It's more than I expected," Delilah admitted, adjusting her hat to shield her eyes from the setting sun. "Mr. Keller, Quentin, please." "Quentin, then." "I appreciate what you did back there, but I need to be clear about something." She straightened her shoulders, summoning courage. "I'm not for sale in any way, if you expect certain things in exchange for your money. I'd rather take my chances elsewhere." To her surprise, Quentin's face flushed red beneath his tan. "No, madam, nothing like that." He cleared his throat. "I meant what I said about needing a housekeeper. My sister Rebecca used to keep house for me, but she got married last spring and moved to San Antonio. Place has been a disaster since." Relief washed over Delilah. "Then I'll earn my keep properly. $20 a month plus room and board," he said, "and Sundays off if you like. That's very generous." It was more than she'd expected to make in Boston. "Fair is fair," he replied, flicking the reins to urge the horses forward. The job's not easy. Besides cooking and cleaning, I could use help with the accounts. Previous owner left a mess of paperwork. I worked as a bookkeeper's assistant in Boston, she offered, feeling hopeful for the first time since arriving in Texas. Quentin's face brightened. Then you've saved me another $20. I'd have paid the banker to sort them out. As they approached the ranch, a large dog came bounding toward the wagon, barking enthusiastically. That's Buck, Quentin said. He looks fierce, but he's friendly as can be. The dog circled the wagon as they pulled up to the house, his tail wagging furiously. When Quentin helped Delilah down, Buck immediately came to investigate her, sniffing her skirts and looking up with soulful eyes. He likes you, Quentin observed. Delilah cautiously patted the dog's head. I've always been fond of animals. The inside of the ranch house was indeed in disarray, though the bones of the place were good. A large main room with a stone fireplace served as both kitchen and living area, with two small bedrooms off to one side. Everything was coated with a fine layer of dust, and dishes were stacked haphazardly on every surface. Rebecca's room is yours now, Quentin said, pointing to the smaller of the bedrooms. I changed the linens before I went to town, at least. Thank you. Delilah set her carpetbag on the bed and took a deep breath. This wasn't how she'd imagined her Western adventure beginning, but at least she had a roof over her head and honest work to do. I'll be in the barn if you need anything, Quentin said, lingering in the doorway. There's stew left from yesterday if you're hungry. After he'd gone, Delilah sat on the edge of the bed and finally let her tears flow. She cried for the humiliation she'd endured, for the parents she'd lost, for the uncertainty of her future. But when the tears subsided, she washed her face in the basin, squared her shoulders, and began to unpack her few belongings. She'd survived this far. She would make this work. The next morning, Delilah rose before dawn. Years of caring for her ailing mother had accustomed her to early hours, and she was determined to prove her worth from the start. She stoked the fire in the stove, found coffee and flour in the pantry, and set about making breakfast. By the time Quentin came in from his morning chores, the kitchen table was cleared of clutter and set with plates of biscuits, bacon, and eggs. He stopped short in the doorway, his hat in his hands. You didn't have to start so soon. I wanted to, she said, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. I hope you don't mind that I went through the pantry to see what supplies we have. Delilah's cheeks flushed. I only meant, no, I like the sound of it, Quentin said, taking a seat at the table. Been too long since this place felt like more than just shelter. As they ate breakfast, Quentin explained the rhythms of ranch life up before dawn, working with the cattle and horses until midday, then repairs and other chores in the afternoon. He had one hired hand, Miguel, who lived in town with his family and came by 3 days a week to help with the larger tasks. Mostly I raise cattle, but I've been breeding horses too, he explained, hoping to expand that side of things. How many cattle do you have? Delilah asked, genuinely interested. About 60 head, small operation compared to some, but it's all mine. There was quiet pride in his voice. No debts except to myself. After breakfast, Quentin showed her around the property, the chicken coop, where 6 hens provided eggs, the vegetable garden that had seen better days, the corral where 3 beautiful horses watched them curiously. That's Thunder, my gelding, he said, pointing to a magnificent black horse. The bay mare is Pepper, and the younger one is her colt, Scout. He's going to be something special when he's fully grown. Delilah approached the fence, and Pepper immediately came over, stretching her neck for attention. She likes you, Quentin said with surprise. Usually takes her time warming up to strangers. Animals can sense when people mean them no harm, Delilah said, gently stroking the mare's velvety nose. "My father kept horses in Boston before he lost everything." Quentin gave her a curious look but didn't pry. "Can you ride?" "I used to, though it's been some years." "Well, if you're interested, Pepper has a gentle gait. Might be nice for you to get around the property without having to walk everywhere." The offer touched her. "I'd like that very much." The days fell into a comfortable routine. Delilah transformed the chaotic house into a welcoming home, scrubbing floors, washing curtains, organizing the kitchen. She discovered she enjoyed the physical work. It kept her mind occupied and gave her a sense of accomplishment each evening. True to his word, Quentin respected her privacy and never overstepped boundaries. He was often gone for hours tending to the cattle, but they shared meals morning and evening, gradually learning about each other in small conversations. She learned he'd come to Texas from Missouri after the war, seeking a fresh start. He never spoke about his experiences as a soldier, but sometimes his eyes held shadows when certain topics arose. He'd worked as a ranch hand for 3 years, saving every penny until he could buy his own small spread. In turn, she told him about growing up in Boston, daughter of a merchant who'd lost his shipping business in a bad investment. Her mother's long illness had drained what little they had left, and when both parents died within months of each other, Delilah had been left with nothing but debts. "The advertisement seemed like Providence," she explained one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "A fresh start in a new place, away from the creditors and the pitying looks." "Ellis is a fool," Quentin said abruptly. Delilah glanced at him, surprised by his vehemence. "To treat you that way," he clarified. "Man doesn't recognize value when he sees it." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. "Well, his loss was your gain, I suppose. You got a housekeeper and bookkeeper for the price of one." "That I did," Quentin agreed, his eyes lingering on her face a moment longer than necessary. As summer progressed, Delilah found herself settling into ranch life with unexpected ease. She began riding Pepper around the property each afternoon, gradually regaining her confidence in the saddle. She took over tending the vegetable garden, coaxing new growth from the neglected soil. And she discovered a talent for baking that delighted both Quentin and Miguel, who declared her apple pie measure que mi abuela's better than his grandmother's. One afternoon, as Delilah was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, she noticed a cloud of dust approaching from the direction of town. Visitors were rare at the remote ranch, and she felt a flutter of apprehension as she shaded her eyes to see better. It was a buggy driven by a well-dressed woman with a young girl beside her. As they drew closer, Delilah could see the woman was pretty, with blonde hair peeking from beneath an expensive hat. "Hello there," the woman called out cheerfully. "You must be Miss Evans." "I'm Caroline Walsh, and this is my daughter Emma." "Pleased to meet you," Delilah replied, smoothing her work dress self-consciously. "Is my brother about?" Caroline asked, climbing down from the buggy. "Your brother, Quentin. Didn't he mention I was coming to visit?" Delilah's surprise must have shown on her face, because Caroline laughed. Typical Quentin, forgetting to mention important details. "We've been in San Antonio visiting my husband's family, and I insisted on stopping by on our way home to Dallas." "He's out with the cattle," Delilah explained, recovering her composure. "But he should be back soon. Please come inside. I'll make some tea." As they settled in the kitchen, Delilah felt Caroline's curious gaze evaluating her. The woman was slender and fashionable, making Delilah acutely aware of her own simple dress and fuller figure. "So you're Quentin's new housekeeper," Caroline said. "He mentioned hiring someone in his last letter, but he didn't provide many details." "I've been here a little over a month," Delilah replied, setting cups on the table. And how did you come to Laredo? It's hardly a common destination for Eastern ladies. Before Delilah could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal the humiliating circumstances of her arrival, the door opened and Quentin strode in, looking surprised and pleased. "Caro, what are you doing here?" He swept his sister into a hug, then bent to kiss his niece's cheek. "And Miss Emma, you've grown a foot since Christmas." "Only an inch, Uncle Quentin," the girl giggled. As the siblings caught up, Delilah busied herself preparing a proper meal, grateful for the fresh bread she'd baked that morning. She couldn't help noticing how different Quentin was with his family, more animated, quick to laugh, relaxed in a way he rarely seemed with her. During dinner, Caroline dominated the conversation with stories of San Antonio society and news of her husband's thriving law practice. Emma chattered about her pony and her friends in Dallas. Delilah remained quiet, serving the food and only speaking when directly addressed. "Miss Evans, you must join us," Caroline insisted when Delilah began to clear the dishes. "I want to hear about Boston. It's been ages since I've spoken to anyone with proper Eastern breeding." Reluctantly, Delilah sat down, aware of Quentin watching her with an unreadable expression. "There's really not much to tell," she demurred. "Boston is beautiful, but circumstances required me to seek employment elsewhere." "Well, you've certainly made an improvement here," Caroline said, glancing around the now tidy house. "When Rebecca left, I feared Quentin would disappear under a mountain of dust and dirty dishes." "Miss Evans has been invaluable," Quentin said quietly. "Not just with the house, but with the books, too. She's got a head for figures that would put most bankers to shame." The unexpected praise brought warmth to Delilah's cheeks. "It's nothing special, just organization." "Don't let her modesty fool you," Quentin told his sister. "She found a discrepancy in the cattle counts that would have cost me a small fortune if it had gone unnoticed." After dinner, Caroline insisted on helping Delilah with the dishes while Quentin showed Emma the new foal born just the week before. "My brother seems quite taken with you," Caroline said casually as she dried a plate. Delilah nearly dropped the cup she was washing. "I assure you, Mrs. Walsh, our relationship is strictly professional. Please call me Caroline. And I didn't mean to imply anything improper. It's just that Quentin doesn't praise people easily, especially since the war." She paused. "Has he told you much about that time?" "No, nothing." Caroline nodded as if this confirmed something. "He came back different, quieter. The jovial boy I grew up with was gone." She glanced out the window where Quentin was lifting Emma onto the corral fence. "This is the most relaxed I've seen him in years." "I'm glad he has you and your family," Delilah said sincerely. "He speaks of you often." "But not of Rebecca," Delilah frowned. "Your sister." He mentioned she kept house for him before marrying and moving to San Antonio. Caroline set down her towel and turned to face Delilah. "Rebecca is his wife, Miss Evans, or was. She died in childbirth 3 years ago along with their infant son." Shock rendered Delilah speechless. Quentin had been married, had lost a wife and child. Why had he let her believe Rebecca was his sister? "I see he hasn't told you," Caroline said softly. "It's not my place to share his grief, but I thought you should know. He's been alone a long time." That night, after Caroline and Emma had settled in the small bedroom, Delilah insisted on taking the sofa. Delilah found herself unable to sleep. Her mind kept returning to the revelation about Quentin's past and the realization that she knew so little about the man, despite living under his roof for weeks. The next morning, Caroline and Emma departed after breakfast, promising to visit again soon. Once they were gone, an awkward silence fell between Delilah and Quentin. "I should check the north pasture fences," he said finally, reaching for his hat. "Quentin." Delilah's voice stopped him at the door. Why did you let me believe Rebecca was your sister?" His shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn around. "Caroline told you. She thought I knew. She was surprised when I didn't." Quentin's hand tightened on the doorknob. "It's not something I talk about." "I understand grief, Quentin. My mother suffered for years before she died. My father followed within months, from a broken heart as much as anything." He finally turned to face her, his expression guarded. "Then you understand why some memories are better left undisturbed." "I do," she said gently. "But I also know that carrying such weight alone only makes it heavier." Something in his face softened. "Rebecca loved this house. She planted the rose bush by the porch, made those curtains you washed. After she died, I couldn't bear to change anything, but I couldn't look at it all either." He took a deep breath. "When you came, started putting things in order. It felt right somehow, like the house could be a home again, not just a collection of memories." Delilah crossed the room and, after a moment's hesitation, placed her hand on his arm. "Thank you for telling me." His eyes met hers, and for a breath, something unspoken passed between them. Then he nodded once, settled his hat on his head, and went out to face the day's work. The admission changed something between them. Not dramatically, but in small, meaningful ways. Quentin began to share more of himself, stories of his childhood in Missouri, anecdotes about the early days of building the ranch. In turn, Delilah spoke of her dreams beyond housekeeping, of the love for literature her father had instilled in her, of her hope to someday open a small bookshop. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch enjoying a respite from the day's heat, Quentin asked her to read aloud from the book she'd brought from Boston, a collection of Tennyson's poems. "'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all," she read, then closed the book. "Do you believe that's true?" Quentin was silent for a long moment, gazing out at the darkening landscape. "I used to think it wasn't," he said finally. "After Rebecca died, I would have given anything to never have known that kind of pain." He looked at Delilah. "But yes, I believe it now." The intensity in his eyes made her heart quicken. Before she could respond, the moment was broken by Buck's sudden barking as a rider approached. It was Miguel, looking troubled. "Senor Keller, there is problem in town. The men who work for Senor Ellis, they are saying you stole something that belonged to their boss." Quentin's face darkened. "Ellis can go to hell. Miss Evans isn't property." "They are drunk at the saloon, making big talk about coming here," Miguel warned. "Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow." "Let them come," Quentin said grimly. "I've dealt with worse than Ellis's hired thugs." After Miguel left, Delilah paced the kitchen anxiously. "This is my fault. I should leave, go somewhere Ellis won't think to look." "You're not going anywhere," Quentin said firmly. "Ellis has no claim on you, legal or otherwise. I paid his asking price fair and square." "But that's just it. No one should have paid anything. I'm not cattle to be bought and sold." Frustration and fear made her voice rise. "I came to Texas to make my own way, not to be bartered between men like a sack of flour." "You're right." Quentin's quiet admission stopped her pacing. "What happened to you in Laredo was wrong. If I could change it, I would. But leaving now won't solve anything." He approached her slowly. Unless you want to go, if you're unhappy here." "No." The force of her own response surprised her. "I'm not unhappy, quite the opposite." Relief softened his features. "Good, because I'd miss your apple pie something fierce." The joke broke the tension, and Delilah found herself laughing despite her fear. "Is that all you'd miss? My baking?" "That," Quentin said, suddenly serious, "and everything else about you." The next morning, Quentin rode into town alone, despite Delilah's protests. He returned mid-afternoon, a cut on his cheekbone but otherwise unharmed. "What happened?" Delilah demanded, immediately bringing a basin of water to clean his wound. "Had a conversation with Ellis," he said, wincing as she dabbed at the cut. made it clear that his claim on you was settled in full, and any man who came to my property uninvited would leave in worse shape than when he arrived. And the cut. One of his men took exception to my diplomacy. A grim smile crossed Quentin's face. He's reconsidering his position from the floor of the saloon. Quentin Keller, you got into a brawl over me. Delilah wasn't sure whether to be flattered or horrified. Wasn't much of a brawl, he said with a shrug. And yes, over you, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Delilah's hand stilled on his face. Why? Quentin covered her hand with his own. Because you're worth fighting for, Delilah Evans. Because when I saw you standing on that auction platform, too proud to let them see you break, I knew you were the strongest person I'd ever met. And because every day since, I've found new reasons to admire you. I'm just a housekeeper, she whispered. No, he said firmly. You're the woman who's brought light back into my life when I thought it was gone forever. Their first kiss was tentative, gentle, a question asked and answered in the warm kitchen as the afternoon sun streamed through the windows. When they finally parted, Delilah's heart was racing, and Quentin's eyes held a wonder she'd never seen before. I should finish my chores, he said reluctantly. And I should start dinner, she replied, equally unwilling to break the moment. Neither moved for a long moment. Then Quentin brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering on her cheek. I'll be back soon. That evening they spoke of practical matters, the changing nature of their relationship, what it might mean for the future. Quentin was clear that he wanted her to stay, not as his housekeeper but as his partner in every sense. I don't expect an answer tonight, he told her. Take all the time you need. Delilah appreciated his patience, but in truth, her heart had already decided. The ranch had become home in a way Boston never had been, and Quentin had become essential to her happiness. As autumn approached, bringing cooler weather and changing colors to the landscape, their relationship deepened. Quentin taught Delilah to shoot a rifle, just in case, he insisted, and marveled at her natural accuracy. She introduced him to the pleasure of reading poetry by the fire, and laughed at his initial reluctance to admit he enjoyed it. News of their courtship spread quickly through the small community. Most reactions were positive, though some raised eyebrows at Quentin courting his bought bride, as unkind gossips called Delilah. She held her head high, refusing to let whispers diminish her happiness. One crisp October morning, Quentin suggested they ride out to see the fall colors in the hills north of the ranch. They packed a picnic lunch and set out at dawn, Delilah comfortably astride Pepper, Quentin on Thunder beside her. The day was perfect, clear blue skies, just enough breeze to cool their exertion, and the landscape transformed into a palette of reds and golds. They rode for hours, Quentin pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the area's history. At midday, they stopped by a small creek where cottonwoods dropped golden leaves into the water. After they ate, Quentin grew uncharacteristically quiet, fidgeting with his hat as they sat on a blanket near the creek. Something troubling you? Delilah asked. Not troubling exactly. He took a deep breath. Delilah, these past months have been the happiest I've known in years. You've changed everything, the ranch, my life, my heart. Her pulse quickened as he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. I'm not good with fancy words, he continued, but I know what I want. He opened the pouch and tipped a simple gold ring with a small pearl onto his palm. This was my mother's. I'd be honored if you'd wear it as my wife. Tears sprang to Delilah's eyes. Are you certain? After what happened with Rebecca, I'll always carry Rebecca in my heart, he said gently. But loving you doesn't diminish that memory, it honors it. She would want me to be happy, and you make me happier than I ever thought possible again. Even though I'm not what most men want in a wife. Delilah gestured to her fuller figure, giving voice to the insecurity that still lingered despite his constant affirmation. Quentin took her face in his hands. "Delilah Evans, you are exactly what I want. Your strength, your kindness, your sharp mind, and yes, your beautiful body, everything about you is perfect to me." "Then yes," she whispered through happy tears. "Yes, I will marry you." The ring fit as if it had been made for her, and when Quentin kissed her, surrounded by falling leaves and the gentle sound of the creek, Delilah knew she had found her true home. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Laredo, with Caroline, her husband James, and Emma making the journey from Dallas for the occasion. Miguel and his family attended, along with a handful of neighboring ranchers who had become friends. Even the town's initially skeptical preacher seemed moved by the obvious devotion between the couple. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," he declared, beaming at them. "Mr. Keller, you may kiss your bride." Quentin didn't hesitate, drawing Delilah into an embrace that prompted cheers from their guests and made Caroline dab at her eyes with a handkerchief. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, with tables set up in the churchyard and everyone contributing food and drink. As the afternoon wore on, Delilah found herself momentarily alone, watching Quentin laugh with James and Miguel across the yard. "Mrs. Keller." A familiar voice made her turn. Mr. Ellis stood behind her, looking uncomfortable but determined. He removed his hat, revealing thinning hair and a deeply sunburned face. "I wanted to offer my congratulations." Delilah regarded him coolly. "That's very civil of you, Mr. Ellis, considering the circumstances of our first meeting." He had the grace to look ashamed. "About that. I behaved poorly, very poorly. My wife has made it clear that she finds my actions unforgivable, and she's right." He twisted his hat in his hands. "I don't expect forgiveness, Mrs. Keller, but I did want to say I'm sorry." Before Delilah could respond, Quentin appeared at her side, his arm slipping protectively around her waist. "Ellis," he said, his voice neutral but his body tense. "I was just apologizing to your wife," Ellis explained quickly. "And to you as well, Keller. What I did was wrong." Delilah felt Quentin's surprise. After a moment, he nodded stiffly. "Apology noted." Ellis replaced his hat. "You got the better end of our deal, Keller. She's worth more than any price." With that, he walked away, leaving Delilah and Quentin looking after him in astonishment. "Well," Quentin said finally, "even a blind hog finds an acorn occasionally." Delilah burst out laughing. "Is that your way of saying even Ellis can recognize the truth when it's staring him in the face?" "Something like that." Quentin pulled her closer. "Though I'd say I got the better end of the deal by a country mile." Their first months of marriage brought adjustments and discoveries. They moved Quentin's belongings into the main bedroom, making the smaller room into a study where Delilah could keep the ranch books and pursue her growing interest in writing. They established new routines that honored both their need for togetherness and their independent natures. And they learned each other's bodies with tender patience, Quentin constantly amazed by Delilah's curves, Delilah gradually shedding the self-consciousness that years of societal criticism had instilled. "You know what I thought when I first saw you on that auction platform?" Quentin asked one night as they lay entwined in the darkness. "That I looked miserable," she guessed. "That you looked like a Renaissance painting come to life," he said, tracing the curve of her hip. "All those gorgeous women Rubens painted soft, strong, beautiful, just like you." Their first Christmas as husband and wife brought a snowstorm that kept them housebound for 3 days. They passed the time reading by the fire, baking with the supplies they'd laid in, and making love in the afternoon stillness while snow drifted past the windows. "I have something for you," Quentin said on Christmas morning, bringing a large wrapped package from its hiding place in the storage room. Inside was a writing desk, small but beautifully crafted, with drawers for paper and compartments for ink and pens. "Quentin, it's wonderful." Delilah ran her hands over the smooth wood. "Where did you find it?" "Had Miguel's father make it," he admitted. "He does fine carpentry in the winters when ranch work slows down. I've seen how you scrunch up at the kitchen table to write your stories." He looked slightly nervous. "Do you like it?" "I love it," she said, throwing her arms around his neck. "And I love you." Her gift to him was a leather-bound journal filled with her neat handwriting, the story of how they met and fell in love, interspersed with her own poetry and pressed flowers from their wedding day. "For when you're old and forgetful," she teased, "so you'll remember how it all began." Quentin read the first page, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I'll never forget a moment of it," he promised. Spring brought new life to the ranch, calves in the pastures, chicks in the henhouse, and wildflowers carpeting the hills. It also brought the news they'd been hoping for. Delilah was expecting a child in the late summer. Quentin's reaction was a mixture of joy and terror. The memory of Rebecca's death in childbirth haunted him, though he tried to hide his fear. Delilah, however, knew him too well. "It won't be like before," she assured him one night when she found him sitting on the porch long after midnight. "I'm healthy, and Dr. Morris says everything looks normal." "Rebecca was healthy too," he said quietly. Delilah sat beside him, taking his hand. "I can't promise nothing will go wrong, but I promise I'll fight with everything I have to come back to you, and our child will know how much they're loved, no matter what happens." As her pregnancy progressed, Delilah remained active in ways that scandalized some of the more traditional women in town. She continued to ride, though only gentle pepper, and only at a walk, well into her 6th month. She insisted on keeping the house and garden, though Quentin hired a local girl to help with the heavier tasks, and she completed a collection of short stories that she submitted to a ladies' magazine in San Antonio. "Mrs. Quentin Keller, author," Quentin said proudly when a letter arrived accepting one of her stories for publication. "I always knew I married a remarkable woman." In late August, as the heat of summer reached its peak, Delilah went into labor. The midwife was summoned from town, and Quentin was banished to the porch, where he paced anxiously for hours, jumping at every sound from within the house. After what seemed an eternity, the midwife appeared at the door, her face wreathed in a tired smile. "Mr. Keller, you have a son, and your wife is asking for you." Quentin entered the bedroom on shaky legs, his heart in his throat. Delilah lay propped against the pillows, her face flushed but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Come meet your son," she said softly. The baby was perfect tiny fingers, a shock of dark hair, his father's blue eyes. Quentin touched his son's cheek with trembling fingers, overcome with emotion. "What shall we call him?" Delilah asked. Quentin thought for a moment. "Thomas, after your father." Tears sprang to Delilah's eyes. "Thomas Quinn Keller. A good, strong name." As he sat beside his wife and newborn son, Quentin felt a contentment he'd never imagined possible. The ghosts of the past were still there, they always would be, but they no longer had the power to overshadow his present happiness. Thomas thrived, growing stronger each day. He had his mother's quick smile and his father's determined nature, and he brought an energy to the ranch house that transformed it completely. No longer a place of quiet routine, it became a home filled with laughter, occasional chaos, and the constant marvel of watching a child discover the world. The years passed with the changing seasons, each bringing new joys and challenges. When Thomas was 2, Delilah published her first book, a collection of frontier stories based on the lives of women she'd met in Texas. Its modest success, brought her a sense of accomplishment beyond her roles as wife and mother. Quentin's horse breeding business grew steadily, earning a reputation for quality that brought buyers from as far away as Kansas City. With the additional income, they were able to expand the ranch house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a dedicated office for Delilah's writing. When Thomas was 4, he gained a sister, Sarah Caroline, named for both grandmothers. Her arrival was easier than her brother's, though it still left Quentin pacing the porch until the midwife called him in to meet his daughter. "She's got your smile," he told Delilah, marveling at the tiny girl in his arms. "And your stubborn chin," she replied with a tired laugh. Life wasn't always smooth. There were drought years when the cattle suffered and income was tight. There was the winter Thomas came down with pneumonia, leaving them all sleepless with worry until the fever broke. There were occasional disagreements between husband and wife about money, about child rearing, about the risks Quentin took with new breeding stock. But there was always love, growing deeper with each passing year. There were family picnics by the creek where they'd become engaged, now with children splashing in the shallow water. There were evenings spent reading together by the fire, Thomas and Sarah listening wide-eyed to stories of knights and dragons. There were tender moments alone when the children were finally asleep, when Quentin and Delilah rediscovered each other anew. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quentin surprised Delilah with a trip to San Antonio, leaving the children with Caroline and James for a week. They stayed in a fine hotel, attended the theater, and explored the growing city hand in hand. On their last evening, as they walked along the river that wound through the city, Quentin stopped and turned to his wife. "Happy?" he asked simply. Delilah looked up at him, at the face she knew better than her own, the laugh lines around his eyes deeper now, a touch of gray at his temples, but still the same man who had stood up for her dignity all those years ago in Laredo. "Completely," she answered and meant it. "Are you?" "More than I ever dreamed possible." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture that had become familiar but never lost its tenderness. "When I saw you that day in town, I knew you were special. I just had no idea how much you would change my life." "You saved me," she reminded him. "No," he said firmly. "You saved yourself by being strong enough to survive until we found each other. I just had the good sense to recognize what was standing right in front of me, the woman who would make everything better, who would fit perfectly into the empty spaces in my life." "Even though I was too heavy?" she asked with a small smile, recalling the auctioneer's cruel words. "Especially because of that," Quentin replied, drawing her into his arms. "I've always loved every inch of you, Delilah Keller. You're perfect to me just as you are." As they kissed beneath the stars, Delilah reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. The humiliation of that auction had led to the greatest happiness. She'd ever known: a loving husband, beautiful children, a successful writing career, and a ranch that was truly home. She had come to Texas seeking a fresh start, never imagining she would find a love story instead. But that's exactly what had happened on that hot summer day in Laredo, when a quiet cowboy had looked past society's narrow definitions of worth and seen her true value. "What are you thinking?" Quentin asked as they walked back to their hotel, arms around each other. "That sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best," she replied. "And that I'm grateful every day for the man who stood up and said $20 when everyone else saw nothing of value." "Best investment I ever made," Quentin said with a grin, pulling her closer against the evening chill. "And I," Delilah said, resting her head on his shoulder, "received the greatest gift, a man who saw me as perfect just as I am." When they returned to the ranch, Thomas and Sarah ran to meet them, full of stories about their time with their aunt and uncle. Buck, now elderly but still faithful, barked a welcome from the porch. The autumn sun bathed the ranch house in golden light, glinting off the windows Delilah had polished that spring, warming the garden where vegetables still grew in neat rows. It was not a grand estate, not the kind of home featured in society magazines. But it was theirs, built on respect, nurtured by love, filled with the messy, beautiful reality of family life. That night, after the children were asleep, Delilah and Quentin sat on the porch swing, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast Texas sky. No words were needed between them. The comfortable silence spoke volumes about the journey they had shared. Delilah thought about the frightened young woman who had stood on an auction platform in Laredo, certain her future held nothing but humiliation and hardship. How wrong she had been. How fortunate that life had other plans that included a quiet cowboy with kind eyes who saw beyond appearances to the heart of things. "I love you, Quentin Keller," she said softly, breaking the silence. He squeezed her hand, his wedding ring catching the light from the window behind them. "And I love you, Delilah Keller. Yesterday, today, and always." In the years that followed, their family continued to grow and change. Thomas, showing his father's affinity for horses, became an essential part of the breeding operation. Sarah revealed a talent for writing like her mother, filling notebooks with stories and observations about ranch life. When Thomas was 16, Delilah gave birth to their third child, a boy they named Robert James, who arrived in the world with a lusty cry and his mother's determination. Though the pregnancy had been unexpected and challenging for Delilah at 40, the joy of another child outweighed the difficulties. Through it all, Quentin remained steadfast, a loving husband, a devoted father, a respected rancher whose word was his bond throughout the county. And Delilah continued to defy expectations, publishing 3 more books and eventually opening a small lending library in Laredo that became a cornerstone of the growing community. Sometimes, when visitors came to the ranch and met the confident, accomplished Mrs. Keller, they found it hard to believe the stories they'd heard about her arrival in Texas. It seemed impossible that this woman, so clearly the heart of her family, so obviously respected by her husband, had once been auctioned off like unwanted goods. But Delilah never hid the truth of her past. Instead, she used it in her writing and her conversations with young women, turning her experience into a testament to resilience and the importance of seeing beyond society's narrow judgments. "Value yourself first," she would tell girls who came to the library. "Then find those who value you as you are, not as they wish you to be." It was advice she had lived by since that day when Quentin Keller had looked at her and declared her perfect just as she was. In his eyes, she had never been too much or too little. She had been exactly right. And in that acceptance, she had found not just love but the freedom to become fully herself, writer, wife, mother, and woman of substance in every sense of the word. 20 years to the day after their wedding, Quentin and Delilah returned to the creek where he had proposed. The cottonwoods were larger now, their golden leaves drifting down to the water just as they had on that autumn day long ago. They spread a blanket in the same spot, though their knees protested a bit more when they sat down. "You remember what you said to me here?" Delilah asked, leaning against his shoulder. "That you were perfect to me," Quentin replied without hesitation. "Still true, by the way." Delilah laughed, the sound as joyful as it had been in their youth. "Even with the gray hair and the wrinkles." "Especially with those," he said, touching her cheek gently. "They're the map of our life together, every laugh, every worry, every moment we've shared." As they sat by the creek, reminiscing about the years gone by and planning for the years ahead, Delilah thought about how far she had come from that auction platform in Laredo. The journey hadn't always been easy, but it had led her here to a life richer and more fulfilling than she could ever have imagined. "Thank you," she said suddenly, taking Quentin's weathered hand in hers. "For what? For seeing me. The real me, not what others saw." Quentin's blue eyes, still as clear and kind as the day they met, held her steadily. "That was never hard, Delilah. You've always shone brighter than anyone I've ever known." As the afternoon sun filtered through the cottonwoods, casting dappled light on their entwined figures, Delilah knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be beside the man who had looked past every superficial judgment to see her true worth, who had declared her perfect when the rest of the world had deemed her lacking, who had offered not just rescue but partnership. In the end, that was their real love story, not just the romantic beginning or the passionate middle, but the enduring truth that had sustained them through 2 decades. That love sees clearly what others miss. That value lies not in fitting some arbitrary standard, but in the unique qualities each person brings to the world. And that sometimes the greatest happiness comes from being seen and accepted exactly as you are. Perfect, just as you are,